Did you know we have a thriving global community of like-minded ancestral home cooks and homesteaders? Every day on our Discord forum, we are discussing what we're cooking, what we're growing, what we're thinking about, what our latest struggles are, and supporting each other to fully embrace this beautiful lifestyle. As a patron member, you can also choose to access an extra private podcast feed, which includes monthly intimate chats where Andrea and I talk in depth about what's happening in our lives and kitchens. There are over 90 recordings waiting for you there right now. In addition, we've got a massive collection of inspiring and helpful downloads for you, including many recipes and videos. And once a month, you'll get to visit with myself, Andrea, and the community as we come together live and in person. Visit ancestralkitchenpodcast.com for all the details on how to join us. Come be part of our world and change yours. I've just released a free 30-page guide to baking with ancient grains. And this companion podcast episode will give you everything you need to know to bring the world of ancient grain baking into your own kitchen. We'll define an ancient grain, we'll talk about why they're different to modern wheat and how that change happened. I'll share why I believe ancient grains are so important in our modern world, and then talk about how you can bring them into your own baking. I'll give examples of gluten and non-gluten ancient grains and explain how you can bake with them. I'll also talk through the 5 delicious ancient grain recipes that are in my free guide, which you can get by navigating to ancestralkitchen.com/ancient grains. In addition to all of this, there is also an after show for supporters of the podcast where I answer a listener question about when to soak, sprout and ferment your grains and what the differences are between the 3 options. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast.
I'm Alison, a European town dweller living in England.
And I'm Andrea, living on a family farm in Northwest Washington State, USA.
Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen.
Hello, Alison. Good afternoon.
Hello, Andrea. Good morning to you. Good, very early morning to you.
Yeah, early morning for me. Nice afternoon. What's it? Cold over there? Sunny?
Yeah, cold.
Okay.
I'm waiting for spring sometime soon, hopefully. Please come spring.
Oh my goodness. I was outside yesterday and I could hear a chickadee somewhere. And I could hear, which we have chickadees all winter, and I could hear a squirrel in a tree.
Mm-hmm.
And it just felt like spring, a little promise of spring. If I closed my eyes and didn't see the snow everywhere.
Oh, you still got snow. Wow.
Oh, yeah. And you know, the kids are sledding. So our driveway is a big, long, steep hill. And Gary actually scraped it down with our skid steer. So it is a perfectly smooth,
wonderful,
long, it's like a roller coaster, basically. So the kids have been skating or not skating, but sledding down the hill. So yeah, it's been lots of fun. The pros of living on a hill is you can sled down. The cons are you have to hike up.
Yeah.
So anyways, look at us surviving. Did you eat before we got on?
Yeah, I had some lunch. I had a lunch that was leftovers, which sounds boring, but it wasn't boring.
Never. Leftovers sounds like less dishes, and I like all those things.
Leftover chicken liver pate, which was made yesterday. I used to make my chicken liver pate, or any liver pate, in big batches. And it took like the whole morning to fry all the onions and fry all the bacon and fry all the liver and then let it cool down. And I just figured, actually, I can do it in smaller batches. So yesterday morning, it's kind of like a tag team effort. I chopped some mushrooms and onion and put a few pieces of bacon in the pan, left it. Then Rob cooked them. I left the liver out, which I'd defrosted overnight. I explained to him, empty the pan when you've done the liver and the mushrooms and when you've done the mushrooms, the onion and the bacon, then put the liver in, leave it to cool. The food processor's here ready. blend it up with these spices that I've already ground. And he did all that bit. That was yesterday. Anyway, so we had leftover liver pate today, which is one of the ways Gabriel will eat pate and liver, which is great. And we had spelt sourdough bread with it, with butter on, and we had leftover cabbage, which we heated up in a little bit of stock to make it extra nice. And also, we had leftover kind of like a hummus. I've been trying to bring some pulses into our diet slowly, but we've had problems digesting them. Gabriel, I mean, when we did gaps, we certainly noticed as soon as we brought the pulses back in, he was very ill.
Yeah, I remember that.
I was trying to find some chickpeas that didn't have the skins on, because you could get them in Italy all the time, but I hadn't seen them here. And then Nicole...
You can buy them without the skins on?
Yeah, you can buy them without the skins on, yeah. So you can buy them in Italy, and they're called ceci, which is chickpea, decorticata, which means they've had their skin taken off.
Corticated.
And so I was looking for kind of hull-less chickpeas in the shop, didn't see any of them. And then Nicole, who's a podcast patron, who I just spent last weekend with because we had a UK meetup for all the patrons in Europe, she stayed an extra day at mine. We went into the shop and she was nosing at all the pulses and found a packet which says chana dal on it, which is the Indian name, and that is chickpeas decorticata without the holes on. But it's called chana dal in this country because I guess it's branded as the Indian name of it. So I bought those and I attempted to make a hummus with them, but I wanted to make it as kind of anti-nutrient as possible, as anti-nutrient as possible. So I soaked the chickpeas in warm water and an acid medium for 2 days, changing the water and the acid medium on the after day one. So it was done twice in a warm in the proofing box. So they were warm, and then I cooked them in the Instant Pot. Now that was one of the things I really wanted to do since I've got the Instant Pot, because in the book called Plant Paradox by Dr. Stephen Gundry, he talks about lectins, and we have had quite a journey with Gabriel with lectins. That book was very influential in his healing path. And he said that lectins, the only way he knew to remove lectins from pulses was to pressure cook them. So I thought, right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take these chickpeas and I'm going to pressure cook them. So I put them in the Instant Pot.
Hold on, I'm stuck on that. Like, I had no idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Pressure cooking them.
Apparently, it's the only way he knows of getting rid of lectins.
Is it because of the high temperature?
I don't know. Interesting, eh?
Wow.
So I put way too much water in, but it doesn't matter because you just drain the water away afterwards. I cooked them in the Instant Pot for 35 minutes. And then rather than paying through the nose for tahini, because that's super expensive in the store, I looked at it, I was like, oh my gosh, you want to pay me to pay that much for tahini? I bought sesame seeds and I soaked them overnight in water because I thought, well, that's going to help with the anti-nutrients in the sesame seeds. And then I put the cooked chickpeas that were cold and the sesame seeds, and I roasted beetroot and 3 cloves of garlic. And so that's all lovely and sweet. I put that in there as well and squeezed the garlic out like toothpaste from the cloves. And some olive oil and some ground up coriander seed. I should have put lemon in as well. I will do next time. And whizzed it all up. Of course, the sesame seeds, as I thought like an hour before I blended it, just stay completely whole. Okay, so it's not quite tahini. But it looks pretty because it's purple from the beetroot and it's studded with sesame seeds.
Oh, wow.
You have to chew it to try to break down the sesame seeds in your mouth. But it's absolutely delicious. It was really gentle.
Sounds really good.
I sometimes struggle with hummus because it's so like pow, the garlic and the lemon and just so in your face. And I'm not really into in your face food much anymore. But this is really gentle. The chickpeas feel gentle. The beetroot makes it sweet. The coriander is like a gentle lemon. And the garlic, because it's roasted and there's not much of it, isn't like forward. And so far, we seem to have been much better with it than we have been with pulses in the past. So I'm really hopeful. That was a kind of a long story. I'm really hopeful that this might be something that I can kind of hone a bit and repeat and might be a way that we can start to bring pulses back into our diet, which would be wonderful. We had a bit of that.
So we do the same thing as you, because I also looked at the price of tahini, and it was like, I don't know, $15 for a little jar or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we get the big bag of sesame seeds. I never thought about soaking them first, but I blend them on their own first, like separately. Okay. So I blend them up, and then I put them in with the beans.
So they're like a powder by the time you put them in with the pulses, are they?
No, they have some fat in them, so they become like a paste when I blend
paste. Okay. And you're doing it in what equipment do you do that in?
Oh, just the Vitamix. That's the only
thing
I have. So a food processor probably be easier, but I don't have one. But you could add like a drizzle of oil too, since it's going in
to keep it going.
To hummus, and it doesn't have to be particularly thick anyways, because it is really, really thick, the sesame paste.
I'm not so hot with wet grinding because I've got my food processor that the amount of sesame seeds I did wouldn't hit it. They'd just get stuck around the side. I've also got a really nice glass, supposed to be a coffee grinder, but I use it to grind up spices. But I don't often do wet things in there, so I don't know how the soaked sesame seeds would do, or even how the sesame seeds would do with oil. I'd have to try that out first.
I wonder if you just got away from making giant batches of
pate.
The pate, but if you made a kind of a bigger container of the tahini and then maybe froze it in ice cube trays or something, and then you just pull out one of those when you needed.
Yeah, I think if we get into the habit, Gable was a bit suspicious of the hummus because I think he's not used to having hummus, but he did eat some, and it was great yesterday when we had it the first time. It was great on carrot sticks and bits of apple and pepper, really, really tasty.
Good.
So we'll see.
I don't have anything. I don't have anything remotely to compete
exciting?
With that.
Go on then. But, tell us what you make.
But I had just made whole wheat. So I ground whole wheat grains, or ground wheat grains, I guess, and made just my usual sourdough loaf. And I was actually making some to send down to a friend. So another Alaskan friend, Leo was just here, and another friend was moving from Alaska to the East Coast. And if you are someone who's familiar with the United States maps, then that would take her through here. And so they stopped in here actually for breakfast, and I made a bunch of loaves of bread and packed a bag of things that went down with her because she was then stopping at another friend's in California. And that friend actually had a question for you, which I'll share in just a moment. Yeah. Okay. And so anyways, so I had made a bunch of whole wheat bread, and I just had some with butter here because it's just, I don't know, hot bread with butter is delicious, which is why I'm excited about this episode. So that was my not very
that was
exciting.
Your breakfast, was it?
Yeah. Not very exciting, but
okay. Before we dive into what we're doing, of course, 12 eggs on the side.
Usual. Yeah.
Before I have to say, you were a star with your egg consumption at the UK meetup of patrons last week, and I think
I got to be famous for something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Why not? Why not for the amount of eggs you consume? Hey,
could be worse.
Okay.
My last name does mean chicken farm, so
I want you because you are the Discord queen. Discord is our community online with no ads, no one pushing anything at you, no one curating you so they can sell you this thing you don't need.
Oh my gosh.
That's our online community. Exactly. And there is so much stuff going on there that I miss, unfortunately, a lot of it. Could you tell us something about what's been happening in the Discord community recently?
Yeah. So something that Tilsha actually suggested this last year. She wanted to do this, and I just never coordinated myself to put it together. But said same friend who I sent the loaves of bread to, shout out to Rachel, and who has the question that I have to ask you. She actually made a reading schedule for Nourishing Traditions. So we are going to read through Nourishing Traditions as a group. It's going to take over a year. The way she divided it up is really smart because, as you know, you and I have both read Nourishing Traditions before. It's the kind of book you could read multiple times.
Definitely.
And there's a lot of non-recipe section in the beginning and at the end. It's all really valuable to read, but there's no recipes in that portion. So what she did was she divided that section up. So there's a little bit of that each month, and then you read through a chunk of the recipe section each month. So you get right to the food part without delay, but you still get all the, Sally has all that great stuff about equipment and all of that. So anyways, so we're reading through that as a group, and we just made like a special thread under the books channel, and so we can comment as we go. I don't know if you see the if you've seen the thread or not.
I have. I looked at it very briefly and was like,
already some stuff is starting to pop up. We just started this month, but so that will be going for quite a while, and anybody who wants to could come and jump in. You could either just grab the schedule and start at the beginning, or go where it's a recipe book. It's not really like you have to read it in sequence like a story. So you could jump in wherever we're at if you wanted to join. So jump onto the ancestralkitchenpodcast.com. And where would they go, Alison?
/join, ancestralkitchenpodcast.com /join, or from the menu,
guess that makes
sense. Community, and that'll tell you.
Yeah.
If you want to join us, you get access to Discord from the very first level that we have. So, depending on your budget and what else you want, you can choose where and how you would like to join us.
Yeah. And if you want the all the extra, like the after show, all the downloads and everything, all of that goes in a section for the $12
The $12 one. Yeah. That's correct. That's called companionship. And we are slowly coming off Patreon and creating our own platform because of kind of rules that Apple have made with Patreon and
We're not the only one.
Methods.
I've noticed other podcasts doing that too.
So Rob is building us a separate platform, and we will still have Discord, we will still have everything kind of the same, but all of the money that you spend being a member will come directly to supporting the podcast, not go into Apple's pocket, which is nice.
Yeah, so depending on when you listen to this, when you go to that link, it might show you a link to Patreon, which if you go there, that's valid. That's where we are. And if it doesn't show that, then it means we've got our system set up and everybody's kind of migrated over. So either one is fine wherever we are. So Alison, tell us what the episode is about.
Okay. So finally, this episode is to celebrate the release of a free ebook that I've created called Baking with Ancient Grains. I've realised, I remember about 6 years ago, I think, maybe saying to Rob, I really like kind of just fermenting grains and doing things with grains. I'd like to kind of become a bit of a, sort of a specialist in that, because I could just see myself just going down rabbit holes in every form with fermenting grains. And it seems to kind of materialised over the last 5 years. So it's a free ebook that is over 30 pages long that you can get by going to ancestralkitchen.com /ancient grains. There's a sign up in there, and then the book will be sent to you automatically. Andrea, you've seen the book because you are one of my read through people, helping me make it as wonderful as ever. So please tell me what you think about the book.
Oh my gosh. I cannot believe that you are making this as like a free download. This is literally a book. It's, how usually when you sign up for someone's email, you got like a 2-page, 3-page, whatever thing. Yeah. Like, this isn't that. This is like literally a book. Leah was here when I got it, and so she kind of previewed it, and she was like, I have paid so much more for so much less. She's like, I cannot believe.
Wow.
And I sent Rachel a picture of it too, and some of the other moms, and they're like, I cannot believe that she's giving this away for the sign up. So you really nailed it with this one, Alison. And I've been cooking with ancient grains, and I learned so much reading this.
Thank you.
I mean, this is really, and I'm really stoked about the episode, so we can go into detail on it. And I have a question for you from Rachel, but after I looked at your show notes, I do not think it's going to fit in the main episode. So if you're fine with sticking around, then maybe I'll ask you after, and we can just record an after show.
Okay, that's fine, yeah.
If that works? Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
Do you want to read the question, or do you want to surprise me with it after?
No, I want to surprise you. No, so Rachel's question was, how do I know when I should soak or sprout or ferment, or do I do them all, or is one better than the other? Are the benefits the same? Are they different? And she also wanted to know if she should be, like if she soaks oats or rice, should she drain off that water and discard it or cook it in it? So anyways, that was her question. So I know you have thoughts. Okay. And I want to hear them. So.
Yeah, we can stick around afterwards and answer that one for sure.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks. All right, well then let's take a quick ad break and then jump right in.
If you've been around ancestral food for very long or listened to the podcast for just a few episodes, you know liver is a superfood, and Alison and I both love it. You're looking at a food packed with vitamins A, K, a broad spectrum of B vitamins, CoQ10, bioavailable iron, plus many essential minerals. Liver is your first stop when seeking to gain energy and restore your health. Not only is it a delicacy and staple of traditional diets, it's the first thing most animal predators go for when they're hunting. Are you looking for a good way to work liver into your daily life, but getting it on the table just isn't happening yet, or as much as you'd like? Or maybe, like I went through earlier this year, you're pregnant and you're pretty sick and not much food is staying down. This is where liver capsules come in. Alison and I are both supplementing our ancestral diets with liver capsules from One Earth Health. We get all the incredible benefits of liver, even when we're on the road, or preparing non-liver meals for our family, or we just can't get a hold of a liver, and the sourcing and preparation has all been handled for us. One Earth Health produces nutritious organ capsules from 100% grass-fed, New Zealand-raised cattle. Support the pod by purchasing through our link. You'll get 15% off your first order and 5% off subsequent orders. Go to ancestralkitchenpodcast.com/liver or check the show notes.
All right. Why exactly did you create this awesome guide, Alison?
Yeah, okay. Several reasons, really. I think the first one, just the same as I believe in ancestral food ways, I think that we all should be baking with non-industrial grains. I've been baking with them for over a decade. They are so full of flavour, incredibly tasting. They are full of health. And the people who grow them for us often do so in harmony with nature, caring for the soil. They are often harder to grow than modern wheat. So for instance, spelt is hard to thresh. It's harder to get the hulls off than standard wheat. And so the farmers who do it because they care. If they were after money, then they would just grow the commodity crop wheat, because that's what's going to bring them the most money. And so I feel like it's a political act in a way, supporting farmers who are doing something differently. I created it also because people ask me all the time about ancient grains. What are they? How are they different when I bake with them? How can I use them? And of course, I've got the Spelt Cookery book, which is on our website, and I've got the in-depth video course on rye. But this is a more general thing, like an overview for people, and you can get it without having to put any financial outlay out. So you can just kind of dip your toes into it. I also made it because I have just recipes that are great and people can be making them. And some of them are on my website, but they're kind of hiding, to actually go back through the blog and highlight everything. I'd have a homepage that was, about 18,000 scrolls long. Whereas here, I can highlight some of those recipes and put them in front of people in a way that's a bit easier. And so people can easily, in that case, choose an alternative to modern wheat in their life. And I think choosing that alternative to modern wheat is very important because there are so many people who struggle to digest modern wheat bread. My husband's an example. He really hasn't eaten any modern wheat for almost 20 years now. And, wow. There is an alternative. There are many, many alternatives, as you will hear in this episode, to modern wheat. So another reason why I did it is because I want those people who can't digest modern wheat to know there is an alternative.
Oh, I love it. Okay, well, let's just forge ahead then and learn from your knowledge and experience. So why don't you start? I know this can be a buzzword because I've seen it on packages, so therefore I know it's a buzzword. But can you define what is an ancient grain before we go any further?
Yeah, I think that's important because I think there's some kind of confusion, like there is around every buzzword.
Yes, exactly.
I think the best phrase that I've got to describe it is that it's an old school grain. It's one that our ancestors have been subsisting on for thousands of years. Now, to explain what an ancient grain is, I really have to talk about something called the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution was a movement that started in the 1940s. And it started as a small-scale project that was supposed to help small farmers in Mexico with stem rust on their wheat. There was a scientist who kind of headed it up called Norman Borlaug, and he was absolutely driven, like manically so. And because of his drive, the program ended up being a program that super intensively selected and crossbred wheat. They solved the stem rust problem in Mexico, and the yield that this guy, Norman Borlaug, had increased in the wheat was 10 times. So the people in Mexico who were growing their wheat, suddenly, for all of this intensive selection and crossbreeding that he did over a period of years, the wheat produced 10 times as much grain. Jeez. And not only that, but it became able to be grown in any geography. So whereas before that, wheats could be grown where they had been grown for thousands of years because they were used to that soil and that climate. But this wheat that he developed, it could be grown in India or, in Canada or in Australia, anywhere. But that new wheat needed huge amounts of water and relied on chemical fertilizers. After this happened, Borlaug carried on with the project and did further crossing to make the wheat shorter so that it wouldn't bow under the weight of all the grain, because there's 10 times as much grain on this wheat and it was 5 foot tall like wheat used to be. We talked about that on the KTC private podcast last month. And so all of the stems were just being weighed down with all of the grain. So he had to do more crossbreedings to make the wheat much, much shorter. And that whole process completely transformed the plant. It was and still is no longer the grain that our ancestors use. It is something that's been taken out of context and messed with on a scale that couldn't even have been imagined before. There's no local wheat anymore that works best in our soils or in our geography. And that whole program then, due to kind of politics and what was happening in the world, just changed everything. It was taken to India and applied to what was thought to be a looming population crisis there, and it created much more food. But in India, it put small farmers out of business because they couldn't buy the fertilizers that they needed to grow this new wheat, and it forced them into the cities to live in slums in India. It ruined the soils there, it altered the natural water table of the Indian fields, and it made that harvest dependent on chemical output. But the governments there supported it because they saw the dollars in it, what they were doing. They were making money. And it is really interesting. If you look at India now, India is now a net exporter of food, a lot of that wheat, and yet it still has swathes of people starving. So it didn't solve India's problem.
Yeah,
so that was the Green Revolution.
So it didn't turn into, now we
the
can grow
answer.
enough grain for everybody. It's cheaper. It just came into, well, everybody's
They just
still
sold
starving, but look how much money we can make. That's crazy. Wow.
Absolutely. And I've heard people say that, poverty in the world is not that there's not enough food. It's that the governments are mismanaging the food, because they want to make money out of it. And, you can see the example of it there of what happened in India in the 50s and the 60s. So, an ancient grain, on the other hand, is one that hasn't been messed with like that. The three that really were worked on were wheat, which was the first, and then the same methods were applied to corn and then to rice.
Really?
And so, so exactly the same things were done to those, because those two are the other kind of staple grains, aren't they? Maize and rice. Yeah. And the examples of wheat, corn and rice on our supermarket shelves are this grain that has been developed for yield to use with pesticides and fertilizers that are controlled by giant corporations and use fossil fuels.
Of course.
And with ancient grains, what's wonderful is that we can turn away from all of that and go to other grains that haven't been hybridized, grains that our ancestors used and thrived on. And I feel like, we've talked about this in a recent podcast, I can't remember which one, that I said that evidence had been found on a mortar and pestle kind of grinding stone in Italy that our ancestors were eating grains 32,000 years ago. But I know, thanks to lots of podcast listeners email me, thanks to Michael, who does amazing research and emails me, that there is evidence of way before 32,000 years ago of, in quotes, paleo people eating grains. So
this
grains
is just
weren't
something we've done as kind of like as far as we can find people. It's not like, 5,000 years ago humans started eating grains.
No, way before that. Long
I think
before.
Sally Fallon talked about that in the, what's that book? Traditional Diets or something?
Okay. I haven't read that one.
Yeah, she talked about Aboriginal people in Australia who were, they I don't know if they're nomadic necessarily, but they moved around a lot. But they were kind of harvesting grains as they went. And then the group that came in behind them would plant. And, so there's kind of this circular situation happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, our ancestors have been using these grains for tens of thousands of years, maybe even hundreds of thousands of years. And then we just came along in the last kind of, sneeze of time and changed them. And now we're eating all of these changed things that were made for money and for yield, not for the things that our ancestors knew were the right things to develop.
So let me get clear. Let me just clarify. So when we look at something like a tomato or something, like a vegetable we grow in our garden, I know that a lot of selecting and stuff has happened and like a blueberry plant never would have had so many blueberries on it.
Yeah.
But you can stand in one place and pick more. So when you say emmer or spelt, when you're talking about those old corns with grains on it, is it the same as those? Is it like I know there's also wild grasses like way back in the beginning. But is this basically the emmer is the version that people were eating, in, I don't know, Babylon or whatever?
Yeah, depending on where they were. And also remember that farmers throughout history have always selected by hand over generations according to what worked best in their own soil and with their own climate. So this is where heritage grains come in, which I know that you have asked me before. What's the difference between?
I do not know what that is.
Exactly.
So not a buzzword yet. You have to tell me.
It will get there. So a heritage grain is one that our ancestors used. And, for example, a heritage wheat grain would be one that they did probably select slowly by looking at their harvest and picking the bigger grains, the ones that were successful, then the next year they planted those, not the ones that died, or the ones that looked a bit manky. And slowly wheat grains developed that had better characteristics for geographies or for climates. And those are called heritage grains. Now, you can get that for rice. There's a book called Rice's Life that I read recently, which literally just looks at all of the old rice varieties. So that's pre-Green Revolution, before rice was taken and done to just be about yield. There are all these old heritage grains that people still have the seeds for that may have been hand-selected by generations in China or in wherever they grew the rice. The same for corn. So, for instance, I remember in Italy using a variety of corn that was blue. Now, obviously, that's not an industrial corn, but it was selected for certain things. It's a heritage grain. So when you hear something like, I think in the States you have red Fife wheat, that is a heritage grain wheat. So it's still a wheat, but it's not a wheat that you would buy, that someone would sell as a commodity. It's not a wheat that you would buy in a supermarket. It's going to cost you more because it's from an old seed. It's not been kind of messed with. So wheat isn't necessarily, all from after the Green Revolution, all been bred for yield. There are these old seeds that are around, and those are called heritage grains. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense, because I can think about it like the animals too. There's
of course.
older wild versions of chickens that nobody would take the time for, but people kept some and bred them and selected them, and they weren't, they still have all those characteristics of the old bird, but they maybe are bigger or lay more eggs or whatever. So
absolutely. So when we were in Italy, we often used to buy chickens that were old chickens, so the breasts were tiny.
Yeah,
and there was lots of bones to make bone broth with, but they didn't look anything like a chicken, on the main shelf, or that you saw in the supermarket.
You made me think of that when you described 10x yield and the shorter stalks, and I was thinking how some of these modern chickens, they're shorter because they literally cannot stand up, and then I look at my heritage birds and they're really tall, so interesting.
Exactly. That's it.
Okay. All right.
Okay. If that's clear, what we'll do now is then we'll go on to talk about some kind of details and specific on ancient grains. Is that good? Yeah?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Hey, you washing the dishes. Been there. You've heard Alison and I talk over and over about her love of rye sourdough bread. Well, I might actually call it an obsession, but that's neither here nor there. Now you can make Alison's rye sourdough in your own kitchen with her as your teacher. And she's a really good teacher. Rye is economical, it's delicious, and full of nutrients and low in gluten. There's a reason why it has been a darling of bread bakers for centuries. Make it into sourdough, as Alison will show you in her course, Rye Sourdough Bread, Mastering the Basics. And you've got an amazing, tasty, and nutritious staple in your kitchen. It's traditional and it's nutritional. In this course, you'll learn everything there is to know about how she creates and maintains her rye sourdough starter, all about whole grain sourdough rye, including the key differences between baking with rye and wheat, how to make 2 loaves, an everyday rye sandwich bread, and a delicious Russian-style dark rye loaf, and what to do with your sourdough discard, including video walkthroughs for sourdough pancakes and a tasty, sweet, spiced cake. Head to www.ancestralkitchen.com/rye.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics of ancient grains. Andrea, where do you want me to start?
Oh my goodness, where to begin? Well, I guess this would be a good question. So you described that it produces 10 times more when they have this modern grain. Am I to infer that that isn't good for us somehow.
Yeah.
Why do we want these? Why would we choose these? You said they're harder to grow, they're lower yield, they're harder to thrash,
They're more
etc.
expensive.
Yeah, therefore they're more expensive. So explain why I would want that.
So the first thing is, we just have to look around ourselves. We can't eat modern bread. Look at the amount of people that can't eat bread. Oh, I can't eat bread, doesn't agree with me. Oh, I can't eat wheat. I can't.
Yeah.
Is modern bread even bread? That's the question that I have. Oof. If you go into a supermarket and just forget about the fact that it's a modern wheat variety that's been bred for yield in somewhere, 70 years ago, and just look at the ingredients on the packet. Is that bread?
I don't want to.
Really? That's before you even say, well, the first ingredient is wheat. Well, that's before you even look at what that wheat is. Modern bread isn't bread. It just isn't. It's not the bread that our ancestors ate. And because of that, and because of the state the world is in with its problems with eating bread, I just don't consider it bread at all.
So do you think people look at how difficult it is for us to eat these modern grains and how, everybody and their brother has 7 kinds of gluten sensitivities, you and I and Rob, like we've all gone through this. And do you think they look around and they say, well, there's just no way people have been doing this for that long. I think we shouldn't be eating grains. But that's not a historical perspective.
I think that's based on the industrial system and the food world that we live in. I think that's a kind of an automatic step that someone might take,
It's kind of like the leap to veganism because of the horrific way that animals are treated.
Animals are treated.
Say, well, then I won't eat any animals. And I totally respect that.
It's easier to think all or nothing like that, isn't it? I'll just stay away from animals because of look at the CAFOs, look at the way that animals are treated. Or when I can't eat wheat, so I'll just stay away from wheat. And there's more education needed on ancient grains and ways of processing, which is part of why I'm here. But
that's why you
can understand why people do that. But it is
absolutely
not necessarily needed. There might be a case that you do have to stay away from all grains for a certain period of time to allow your system to heal. But I think that it's easy for the paleo community or the keto community or the community that is also anti-grains or the vegan community or whatever, to just go, just your grains are bad, grains are bad. But it's potentially modern wheat that's bad, not grains, for a lot of people. So we need them for that.
So why else?
Because we need proper bread back. We need them because we need to move away from what we're doing to the land. We are covering our land in chemicals. We are depleting our topsoil. We're not going to have any topsoil left. We are literally raping our land, and we need to move away from that. And buying ancient grains rather than supporting modern wheat can do that. I think we need to support diversity, and we need to support the farmers that promote it in a good way. I also think we need ancient grains because we eat so few things. You must have heard, I'm sure that all listeners have heard, the diets of typical Westerners are, 5 foods, basically. And
what?
It's easy for someone to just eat wheat and wheat in different guises.
I did not.
Yeah,
I guess
there's people who say, well, basically, the majority of our diet is like 5, 6, or 8 foods.
And that's probably all commodity crops, huh? And by commodity crops, you mean literally, anybody who's around farming knows what you're talking about, but like food that is grown for a specific sale price only. It's not because it is a nitrogen fixer in your cover cropping or it's beautiful or it's delicate or anything. It's just money.
There's I think I put a stat in the book Baking with Ancient Grains, which says something like, or maybe I just read it when I was writing it, that 90% of the grain crops grown are these modified wheat, corn.
You did. It's on page 4.
Maize. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Which is just bonkers. And someone can eat, breakfast cereal for lunch, a breakfast cereal for breakfast, a sandwich for lunch, and pasta for dinner, and then you've got wheat. And it's all modern.
And then they're like, gosh, my tummy hurts.
Exactly. And yet, the Whole Grains Council tells us that there are 22 grains. You wouldn't believe that, considering most people eat wheat, on a standard American diet. And everyone's telling us to eat more. There's a big push over here for 30 plants a day. Obviously, grains are plants, all in the media. And there are 22 grains. So you can put variety into your diet just by diversifying, saying no to modern wheat and saying yes to, say, 5 different ancient grains and eat them from Monday to Friday. And then you've got diversity, With 22 grains, you could have a different grain every day of the week for 3 weeks. We need that, and we eat so few things. So I think that's another reason why we need ancient grains.
Okay. Okay. So I think I've got a handle on what the ancient grains are and are not. And okay, you said there's 22.
Yeah.
So what grains are those all still grown? Are those ones we can still buy? What grains can I use?
Okay. So, like I said, an ancient grain is a grain that's not been affected by the Green Revolution. And I think it's sensible, or considering there are 22 of them, it can get a bit confusing, to divide them into 3 categories.
Okay.
So the first category is similar to wheat grains. And in there I would put spelt, emmer and einkorn. Grains that you can handle in a similar way to wheat and taste kind of similar to wheat. Then you've got grains that contain gluten, but that are different in working properties to wheat. And I would put rye and barley in that category.
Wait, so those have gluten in them?
Yeah, they have gluten. They have
not
less gluten and different type of gluten to wheat.
Oh.
But they do have gluten in them. So if you're celiac,
type.
You shouldn't eat them.
Okay.
But like Rob, you might have a problem with wheat and yet be fine with rye, even though rye has gluten in it, which is interesting. Then the third category is gluten-free grains. Gluten-free ancient grains like oats, which we've got episodes on, millet, which we've got an episode on, and buckwheat. So those 3, there's wheat, similar grains. Yeah, next. There's gluten-containing grains that are different to wheat, and there's gluten-free grains. Each of those 3 types needs to be handled differently when you're baking with them. So obviously this ebook that you can download is about baking, and there are recipes in there for each of the 3 different types that I've just described. So wheat grains can be made into breads in a similar way to wheat. And my spelt cookbook that you can find on the podcast website under books, I think.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Thank you. That talks about the nuances of working with spelt to make a grain. Most of my recipes in there are 100% whole grain, and those will make breads that don't look like fluffy Instagram, cameraable puffy loaves. But any ancient whole grain recipe will be different and will be tastier and will be more nutritious.
You don't have to go past the the Italian Renaissance paintings and things to see that bread looks different. Not actually vastly different, or maybe I'm just accustomed to this, but it doesn't look like those puffy, squishy Wonder Bread type things in the old pictures. So that's not what we're not going for. We're not replicating that, not even trying.
So those wheat-like ancient grains, there is no wheat recipe that I wouldn't make with those. So any recipe that I've found.
So you mean if I just have I guess keep going. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say literally, if I see a wheat recipe online, I just like, right, okay, I'm going to make it with spelt. I'm going to make it with Emma. I'm going to make it with einkorn. There is no recipe that you cannot
one from that
convert.
That makes sense, because I've been doing that with einkorn. That I just throw einkorn in whatever, and I'm like, it needs to be a little more wet or a little less wet. Yeah, it kind of changes a little bit with the different grains. But the more you use it, you get used to that. So this whole grain, as an example, you have this whole grain sourdough spelt bread recipe in this book.
Yeah, that's right.
Could I essentially look at that and say, well, I don't have spelt, but I do have emmer.
Yes.
Like, could I kind of switch between the ones in that category?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd have to toy with it a bit.
And you could do that with any kind of spelt recipe. So any of the recipes in my spelt book, the pastry, pasta, they're not pasta actually, the breads, the pizza, the cakes, any of them, you could use emmer or einkorn instead of spelt if you wanted to.
Okay. All right. Okay, I think the answer is my question. Because I'm looking through and I'm like, okay, if you got each of these categories, like, you could just kind of switch around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Between the three. Yeah.
Do you want me to read Brittany, it was a friend of mine I know her through the literary life. She actually got your spelt book. Can I read what she said?
Yeah, do.
Okay.
Please.
Okay, so she got your spelt book and she got the grain mill.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So she said, I just started using my mill. I've made approximately 4 loaves with it, and they've all been super yummy. I found Alison's cookbook about spelt to be hugely helpful, especially if you are using an ancient grain. Her book is about spelt, but I tried the same technique with freshly milled einkorn and had good results. I have not tried a boule yet, so these are sandwich loaves, which is a good way to start getting used to it. I've also been using only emmer, einkorn, and spelt for a few years, so I know I'm not going to get a huge open crumb with these.
Exactly.
So that spelt book she's referring to is the one you actually sell. But anybody who's just downloading this one for free, sounds like they could just swap it out. Okay. All right.
So they could start with, there's one spelt recipe in the free Baking with Ancient Grains. Once you've downloaded that, you have that recipe and you can start there, and you don't necessarily have to make that with spelt. You could make it with emmer or einkorn.
I love it.
The other thing I wanted to say about those grains is if you are still using some wheat in your kitchen to make bread and you want to just start slowly with these wheat-like ancient grains, you can just put a bit of spelt or a bit of emmer into one of your grains, into one of your breads. So just maybe put 15% of that in instead of 100% wheat. Make it 85% wheat, 15% emmer or 15% spelt. And notice what happens. Notice what happens to the fermenting time. Notice what happens to the bread as it rises. Notice what happens to the crumb. And try again. And then slowly you can add more. If you've got family who are kind of used to the flavour of wheat, then you can sort of slowly introduce them to the ancient grains that way. That's another easier way to do it if you want to. Okay, so moving on to gluten-containing but non-wheat-like grains, which have to be worked differently. You can't knead them. You can't expect to have them elastic like you would a wheat-like ancient grain. So, for example, a bread made with rye will not rise through that gluten mesh network, where gluten strands create a mesh which traps the fermenting gases. And, if you stretch that loaf, that's the gluten mesh network. Rye instead, when it's mixed with water, creates a gel. And it's that gel that sort of traps the bubbles in. But you can't, if you've got a fermenting rye loaf, you can't stretch it. If you put it in your hands, it would just come apart in 2 different bits. You don't need rye. But when you're baking with rye, you have to watch for other things. So, for example, rye fermentation produces things called pentasands, which can break down that gel-like structure in your rye bread. Rye is a whole nother world when you're baking, and one that is so delicious and so amazing, and that I have and continue to, thanks to Rob starting me off, to deep diving into. And that's why I have the rye course. So if you want to get into rye, get into that.
Yeah, if you want to get into rye, for sure, I would say I think it's episode 41, which I can link in the show notes.
Thank you.
But you talked about rye specifically on there, which was such an education for me. And you have a 10% off link for your rye course as well. But what I think is interesting about your rye, and actually your spelt book too, is that it is actually pretty difficult to find recipes online that are 100% ancient grain, because of the fact that everybody's so accustomed to working with wheat that they're trying to sort of bring in that element of wheat and mimic it a little bit.
Yeah.
But what's unique about you is you have literally never cooked with wheat. So you're not
never
trying to copy it at all. You're just going for perfection with rye. So
yeah, and because it just seems like an obvious choice to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, you mentioned the 10% discount. There's a link which is ancestralkitchen.com/rye, and the discount's already applied when you use that link. So if you're interested in purchasing the rye course, then we'll put that
type
in the show
something
notes
in
as well. There's going to be a long show notes.
Yes.
You can just enter that in.
We love long show notes.
Barley's kind of similar to rye. I gave the example of rye. Barley's similar.
Oh.
The third kind of block of gluten-free ancient grains. Again, they have to be handled differently to wheat when baking. So this is buckwheat, teff, amaranth, oats. They don't have a structure to help rise a loaf of bread. So they are great to use as companions to other wheat-style grains. So, for example, there's a recipe in the spelt book which has got a scald made of sorghum. So sorghum flour is cooked up in a porridge style and then put in the spelt bread. So that's what I mean as a companion. Or you can use them on their own to make alternative breads. And I use the word alternative because of the environment that we're in now, where everyone thinks that breads have to look a certain way. But these breads weren't alternative for the populations that lived on them generation after generation, because those were the grains that grew around them, and therefore that's the bread that they make. So, for example, teff pancakes, which we've talked about quite a lot on the podcast, and we have a video going back of Chef Aaron Goldstein making teff pancakes. They were made in Africa, called injera. Oatcakes also were made in Great Britain. They are an example of an alternative bread with a gluten-free ancient grain. And buckwheat is another example. So in northern France, there's a very strong tradition of crepes made. So crepes are very, very thin pancakes made with buckwheat.
The Russian ones too.
Yeah,
are very traditional.
Well, blini.
The blini, yeah.
Exactly. So those are all breads that were breads. You know, just because they don't look like our bread, we call them alternative breads. But they're not really alternative breads because they're breads.
Our bread is actually the alternative bread. Because when you want to look at populations that have been eating these ancient breads and flatbreads and pan breads and, polenta type things, it goes back a lot farther and is a lot more widespread.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a recipe for oatcakes, one of those alternative breads, in the free ebook. So once you've downloaded, you can start making those. Before we do talk about the recipes, which I want to talk about, Andrea, I want to talk about milling your own flour just briefly. After years of buying my own flour, I've been doing that since we, up until like a year ago, since we met. Now all the time I mill my own flour, and I would never go back now to shop bought flour. The flavour, the nutrition difference that you can hear about if you go back and listen to our milling episode, the economy of buying the grains in bulk, the convenience of just, fresh grains, look, 2 minutes and it's done, and the connection I feel between my bread on my plate, with, on my family's plates, and the grain is immense. All of those are immense to me. So
I don't think anybody who's gone to milling flour can go back. It's really once you're in, you're in. Like you can't.
You're in. Exactly.
You can't go back from that. And I was thinking earlier, Alison, when you were talking about the cost, that honestly, if you were buying the whole grains in bulk the way you are and the way I am, and then milling them yourself, I actually think it's cheaper than if you're buying flour at the grocery store.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to run numbers on that because, I love doing that. But I'm just in my head, I'm mapping it out, and I'm pretty sure that it's cheaper. So you can get your organic ancient grains and make your bread cheaper than buying white flour at the grocery store, which is just wild.
I think you're right, because I was working earlier this year on a guide for the podcast website. And whilst doing that, I was researching on Azure, actually, how much you pay for ground flour and how much you pay for bulk purchasing grains. And I can't remember if I put the actual specifics of how many cents and dollars it was in the guide, or whether I just put that in my notes before I wrote the guide. But it was substantial, the difference. So you're right.
Well,
really
and
cheaper.
The Azure price for flour is way cheaper than the grocery store.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
So come to that. So you're looking at the bulk prices there. But if somebody's just going to the supermarket and buying like a bag of flour versus, going to a mill near you or Azure or somewhere and saying, can I have 25 pounds or...
Well, it's hard to do that anyway, especially with whole grain flour, because it's going to have those fats in it. And unless you can perhaps get it in the freezer, those fats are going to degrade before you've had a chance to finish that flour. So,
100%.
Another reason.
And when people always say, how long does honey last? How long do grains last? And I tell them the things that we find in Egyptian tombs are grains, honey, and essential oils. So if you need to stock up on one of those things, you're fine. You're fine.
That sounds like quite a nice life, actually.
It'll outlive us all.
Oils.
Yeah, the riches of Egypt.
Yeah. Okay. So that guide to milling is...
where do we get that?
Yeah, it's up on our website. So if you go to ancestralkitchenpodcast.com/milling, MILLING, you can view that on your browser. And
I'll put it in the notes.
Thank you. Another one. Okay, so let's move on and talk about some specific recipes.
Okay.
Do you love oats? Want to try your hand at a traditional Scottish oat fermentation? Suans is just that. It was made in Scotland for centuries and will give you both a creamy, easy-to-digest porridge and a tangy probiotic drink. My video course, Suans, the Scottish Oat Ferment, over at the Fermentation School, will guide you through everything you need to know to create these two ancestral foods in your own kitchen, no matter what equipment you have. Head to ancestralkitchen.com/Suans, ancestralkitchen.com/Suans, SOWANS, or click the link in the show notes to get a 10% discount automatically applied. Okay, so now let's talk about baking specific recipes with these grains, which you will find 5 recipes in my book.
Yes, this is the part that we're all here for.
Exactly. So the first recipe is for Scottish oatcakes. Now, when I say the word oatcake, sometimes people get confused because it's got the word cake in it. And you think, well, it's not a cake, really.
By people, you mean Americans?
See, I do. I was being polite. So
I know when you're calling us out.
Oatcakes, I would say they're more like biscuits than cakes, but I think that might still confuse
and then you really lost us.
Exactly. So crackers is probably the word that you would understand for what I mean by an oatcake. It's a flat, thin mass of dough. And there is a recipe in the free Baking with Ancient Grains for Scottish oatcakes. They are made with 100% oats, which are an ancient grain, and they are thin and flat and easy to make and crisp and delicious. So that's the first recipe.
Yum.
that recipe is on my blog too, and it's one of my most popular hits. Lots of people.
Yeah, I was actually looking at it yesterday. Because you have 2 oatcake recipes on your website,
right.
but this one, I like that you've got the. Can I just read, Alison, your description?
Of course you can. Yeah.
Because it is poetry. You said, biting into a freshly made golden oatcake is a complete joy. First, there's the satisfying snap as it breaks. Then the crumbly, crunchy oats impart their toasty flavor. And as you chew, you understand why oats are called the golden cereal.
Making me hungry.
You used all these, what is the word? The onomatopoetic, whatever words like.
Sounds nice when you read it.
Crunchy oats, satisfying snap. It just makes me want to eat them. It's so good.
They are good, and there is a recipe right there for you to make them, and everyone else who's listening to the podcast. Exactly. They'll go really quickly. Maybe double it, do 16.
Look at that. Oh yeah, for my family, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Then the next recipe is, as you've mentioned a bit earlier, a spelt sourdough. That's a really simple recipe. So, if you've never used an ancient grain before, if you've baked or if you haven't baked, the instructions in there will guide you through how to make that. All you need is a sourdough starter and some spelt. It doesn't have to be a spelt sourdough starter. If you've got a wheat sourdough starter or a rye sourdough starter, that's fine. It will give you a sandwich loaf, which you bake in a tin, that will knock the socks off the flavour of any wheat loaf that you've made.
Heck yes. Sure. Oh, that looks so good. And you've got all these links, too, in the book, I want to say. I was really impressed with all the resources, everything up to episodes we've done on specific topics, to
so many episodes.
Links to the pan you use, videos of you making the aluminum foil. Like, really, the only thing you didn't do was fly across and hold my hand. Yeah. It's all in here.
I tried to give as much, and there's colour photos at the end. So all the our cookbooks that we sell, all the colour photos are at the end. And so if you want to print this book, which both Andrew and I have, then if you don't want to print the colour photos, I think on the first page, the introduction, I tell you, just print, from page 1 to page 20, whatever it is. You can print that in black and white without using up your colour ink. Or if you want to print the beautiful photos, you can print those as well. But you can do it either way. So there's photos
and I shouldn't have, because they are delicious. But I did. Here they are.
Okay, the third recipe is a millet polenta bread. And this, millet, as we talked about in our episode on millet, is often just sidelined as a bird feed. But millet was routinely used for polenta in Italy before corn came from the New World. So you can make easily polenta, which then is put into a loaf tin and left to cool, and then you can slice it. And of course, this one's gluten-free. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Go on.
So you are the place that I found out that polenta wasn't just corn. Okay. I mean, I had no idea before. You had told me before I saw this, but I didn't know. And what does polenta mean? Do you know?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. No,
I wonder if it's just
pasta means dough. I mean, literally pasta means dough. I don't know what polenta means. We need to do some etymology research on that, because that's really quite interesting.
But it is interesting to me because of, in that What I Eat book, it comes up a lot. And then Beatrice made some in a video. She made ugali, which is like basically it's kind of like polenta. It's like a cornmeal cake. So in the description, it sounds similar.
It's, polenta's interesting because you can eat it kind of as not a liquid, but as a paste. Just like you would eat a porridge or a pottage kind of idea. But then you can make it set and eat it. And Italians have got used to having it, set, and then they would have it on the side as a carb with something. Now, people used to do that with oats. They used to cook up porridge and then pour it into a drawer and leave it, and it sets, and then they used to cut off bits of it during the week. It's kind of a similar idea to polenta, but we've completely lost that with oats. No one pours porridge into their drawer anymore in Scotland, I don't think. Maybe
you don't, but
someone does somewhere. Probably I'd love to go there and see them doing it. Whereas Italians do still keep their extra polenta and use it the next day. And that's what, that is such a useful thing to put into all you need is a bread tin, and you put it in there and you've got a beautiful kind of bread.
Well, and that's exactly how my friend Beryl made it. And she's from Kenya, from the Luya tribe, and she would make like with white cornmeal. She's like, oh, it has to be white. And she'd make it in a pan and dump it out, just like you said.
Yeah.
And then we would just like kind of cut a piece to have with our chicken or whatever.
Yum.
But I think it was you that told me about taking a slice the next day and frying it. I was like, what? So good. It's so good. Nice. And the internet is useless, in case anyone's wondering, because there's 1,000 posts here saying, oh, polenta means cornmeal. Polenta is an Italian dish made of corn. They don't know what they're talking about.
It is, but it wasn't. Chestnut flour is used in polenta a lot as well.
What? Okay.
Yeah, it's really nice, really sweet and lovely. Anyway, okay, so next recipe, focus. The next recipe in the book is a rye whole grain sourdough. So this is one of the grains that is not wheat-like, behaves differently, as I was explaining with rye, but still has gluten in it. And this probably is the most complicated recipe in the book. But even if you've never worked with rye before, the recipe and the instructions will talk you through how to make it. It's so delicious, and it's whole grain, so it's got that deep flavour, but it's also sliceable. So literally, you can make sandwiches with it as well. Okay.
Could you make this with barley then?
You could, but I probably wouldn't use the same process, because the process of the it's got a very large kind of pre-ferment in it. So you make a pre-ferment, which is like a huge starter, basically. And the reason you do that is to keep the acidity level of the main dough at the right place, so those pentasands that I was talking about earlier on don't attack your bread. That is not necessary with barley. Barley doesn't have that same problem. So I probably would not use the same process for barley.
Okay, that's why we pay you for the course, because I don't know what anything you just said means. All right. What's
exactly. Next? Okay, last recipe in the ebook is buckwheat pancakes. I make these lots of different ways. The one that's in the ebook is made from a whole buckwheat grain that is soaked to make it soft, and then blended up with any live culture and fermented naturally, and then fried in my cast iron pan. To make
you've pancakes. You said kefir, yogurt, apple cider vinegar, sourdough discard, anything that has live probiotics in it. Well, that's handy.
That recipe is simple because it's mostly just soaking. You soak the whole grains, and then when they're soft, you blend them up and leave them with the kefir, and you just leave it. And as long as if you kind of want it on a Sunday, you have to start it on a Thursday, but there's nothing to do really. And then buckwheat is so tasty. It really is. So it's got such a distinctive smell when it's cooking, and the pancakes stick together really well, because often with gluten-free grains, when you're making breads or pancakes, it's hard to get them to stick together because they don't. Like if you make a millet pancake, it will just fall apart. But buckwheat has this kind of elasticity to it that means you can just do 100% buckwheat and the pancakes are wonderful. They don't fall apart. You flip them.
No wonder it's so popular for pancakes. Jeez.
Exactly.
Or crepes or whatever.
So all of those 5 recipes are part of the 30 pages of the book. The rest of it is kind of an education in ancient grains, what they are, the different grains you can use, baking tips for baking with them. And there's so many resources. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. You've got 3 pages of resources.
How many resources?
You've got YouTube videos, podcast episodes,
yeah,
courses that are relevant.
loads of blog posts, just tons of information.
Yep.
That,
And
whatever
pictures,
wherever you want to go with your ancient grain baking journey.
Gosh, this picture
there's
of
something in here that will help.
Your stacked Scottish oat cakes.
Yeah.
First of all, I love how you're such a stickler for detail, because that's how I do it too when I'm cooking. Leah and I were laughing because I was like, wow, I realized I'm way more meticulous. I thought I was a sloppy cooker, but then she was standing there watching me dice potatoes, and I was like, they have to be exactly the same size. She's like, that was chowder. Oh, man. But I love how perfect your oat cakes look.
Thank you. I'm looking at the pictures in the back now, trying to not...
I mean, if somebody's coming onto this and has no idea how much research Alison has done into oat cakes, just know she's at like Silmarillion level here on the oat cakes.
To try and record this podcast today, I worked on the oat book a bit this morning for like 2 hours I had.
Ah, good.
And I'm writing, I'm trying to write a section on two breads called Havercake and Clapcake. And I had like notes everywhere, all over the bed, and then books, and just the computer was on the stand. And of course, I don't use the keyboard really, so I had the microphone, and it was all in a big pile. And then I tried to make some space to record the podcast. And I said to Rob, it's just books everywhere. I need more space. I'm writing a book. I need more space.
You're like the mad scientist, like red strings. Okay, so the Havercake, Scotland, and then put it over here. Oh.
So you can see the buckwheat pancakes as well in there on page 29.
Oh.
And
yes.
That picture. I think I fried those ones in butter there.
What are my buckwheat pancakes? My buckwheat pancakes are like black. Is that because I'm using...
that's because you're using buckwheat that still has its hulls on. So the inside of the buckwheat is white, the outside is black. And the black has a really intense, much stronger flavour. Most of the histamine is in the black bit of a buckwheat grain. So you can buy whole buckwheat grains. My recipe is for white buckwheat grains, so they've already had their whole.
Oh, I see. You said hold, but I thought you were saying whole buckwheat grains.
Oh, no, hold.
I get it now. Okay.
I should say hold.
Hold.
So you can buy, for example, in England, you can buy buckwheat flour from Hobmadod's, the wonderful grain supplier. And they have light buckwheat flour, which has got little bits of the black in it, but not much. So you get a bit of the black flavour, but it isn't overpowering. The black buckwheat is quite strong, but very nice.
Oh, I mean, we like it, so I guess whenever we try the hold one, it'll seem
see how
mild.
different it is.
Yeah.
It will do. Yeah. So that's why yours are black. Mine are golden. There's a picture at the top right of the buckwheat fermenting, and sometimes buckwheat fermenting can go pink on the top. I remember Rebecca Zip, who I just did the episode last month about
the gluten-free
one. She said to me, my buckwheat kind of went pink on the top and smelt funny. But that's fine. It doesn't matter if it goes pink. It doesn't have to go pink, but it does sometimes. Don't worry about that. Don't worry if it smells a bit funny, because that's the probiotics off-gassing. That's fine. It doesn't taste like that. It tastes absolutely wonderful. I'm looking at the pictures now and thinking, they look good.
Yeah, they do.
It's just, it's so wonderful to see all this information together, because I've been kind of slowly working on this in different squirreling ways, not realising how much information I just had at my fingertips. And to feel like I could put together this kind of beautiful, useful thing, useful and beautiful both at the same time, for people to just download and start. That's what I know,
just keep going. No, I think this is so exciting.
Thank you.
All the ladies, I hope they're listening. They just said, we can't wait for it to come out. Tell her to hurry up, get it out. So I'm so happy that they can download this now. And the buckwheat and soaking the buckwheat and stuff I see in the recipe makes me want to ask you Rachel's question. But I also see the time on this episode, so I know we have to go to the after show for that. But was there anything else you wanted to get on the main feed before we wrap this up?
No,
okay,
I don't think so.
Got it covered. So go. Where do I download this, Alison?
You can download this at Ancestral Kitchen, my website, not the podcast website. So ancestralkitchen.com / all one word, ancient grains.
Okay. And of course, that's in the slow notes. That's in the show notes.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, let's say farewell to the main feed and jump onto the after show. And I will see you over there.
Great. Thank you.
If you'd like to support the podcast, you can join as a patron. Choose from various levels starting at $5. You can see what we offer at ancestralkitchenpodcast.com.
While you're there, check out our favourite books, supplements and kitchenware, or give a one-time donation.
Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.
And if you know someone who would love our show, tell them about us.
You are helping to bring ancestral food wisdom into modern kitchens, changing the world one plate at a time.